This screen is working very beautifully. So if you want to shift down toward this side, then you'll be able, then you won't miss a thing, right? And you won't have to be thrown off by the whole split screen situation. All right, so I mean, it's totally up to you. I'm putting that disclaimer out here now, right? So this screen is going to be a little funny for some of the presentations. That is good.
Just be sure to sit at a table where there's some pieces.
Oh yeah, take a paper with chairs. Perfect. All right, well, good evening, and thank you for coming out to our One Book, One Campus event called Campus Conversations. We are excited to be spend the evening with you and to learn and think together. And in addition to a special video greeting from Emmy Interanta, the author of Memory of Water, we've also assembled a fabulous panel of faculty presenters. And they are going to be delivering Ignite-style presentations that are aimed to get you thinking about the novel in connection with their discipline, as well as what you can do to impact sustainability both on our campus, our community, and in the world. So let me introduce you to our panelists to start out. This is Dr. Kim McCollum Clark from the English department. She's, are you doctoring that?
I'm doctorate.
She undoctorate, all right.
I am one, but I prefer just Kim.
All right, excellent. Next to her, we have Dr. Sam Ehrman from the Earth Sciences Department. Next to him, we have Dr. Nadine Gardner and Dr. Jason Baker, who are from the Department of Psychology, and they are co-directors of the Center for Sustainability here on campus. Then we have Dr. Nanette Markham-Dietrich from Educational Foundations, and Dr. John Wallace from the Biology Department. My name is Dr. Jen Shettle, and I am co-chair of the One Book, One Campus Committee.
And I'm Marilyn Parrish, and I'm the other co-chair. I just wanted to take a moment to thank some people who are here tonight. We are indebted to a number of people on campus who have provided support to the One Book, One Campus program. To the members of the One Book, One Campus Committee who are here, thank you for your support, as well as Jeff Adams, Marie Zufeld, and the Office of the Provost, and Lynn Marquez. And we'd like to recognize the good work of orientation leaders, faculty teaching University 103 sections, and the graduate students who are here tonight who are helping to facilitate. Julie Herr is here from the University Store, so any of you who don't have a copy of the book and really must get one following our fascinating discussions tonight, there are copies there. We will be exploring themes relating to sustainability all year, as Jen mentioned, and you can find additional events listed on our website. Now we're going to hear a special greeting from the author of the book to Millersville.
Hi, Millersville University. My name is Emmy Interanta. I wrote Memory of Water, and it's so exciting for me to know that you are all reading my book this academic year. My understanding is that you got all kinds of events and discussions on campus this term, and I would have absolutely loved to come and visit, but since that was not possible due to a number of reasons, at least this way I can be there virtually. I won't talk too much about the book because I think most of you will know by now what it is about, but just to give a brief introduction, Memory of Water is a story set in a future world in which a young woman has to take the responsibility for protecting a hidden freshwater spring that her family has been guarding for generations. And the story really revolves around her choices as everyone in the society, including the military governments, are trying to get their hands on the water. But that you probably knew already. So I thought it might be more interesting to talk a little bit about the writing process. I began writing Memory of Water back in 2008. I had just moved to England and I was doing a creative writing degree at the University of Kent. And I had to submit something for my creative writing class. And at the time, I was following closely news about climate change and especially its impact on freshwater resources. And I felt that it was a subject that was not being written enough about back then. And at the same time, I was really interested in Japanese tea culture, particularly what they call chado. I hope I pronounced that more or less correctly. Chado, or the way of tea, which is a highly specialized way of preparing and serving tea in Japan, and has very strong and long roots in Zen philosophy. So I was reading about these two completely different things because they both interested me, and one day these two entirely separate things that had nothing to do with each other just combined into one image in my head. I saw in my mind the main character of the story. I saw this young woman in a future world preparing tea for herself in a very traditional manner, with the last small drop of water that she had left. And this image would not leave me alone. It contained not just the main character, but it already contained the world of Memory of Water and the main conflict of the story in a nutshell. And I wrote a few pages based on that image and submitted those pages to my creative writing class. And my teacher who read it said to me, "This is not a short story, this should be a novel." And at the time I didn't believe her. It took me probably about a year to convince myself that I was actually writing a novel, but my teacher encouraged me to pursue it and to finish it. So eventually I did, and those few early pages from many years ago, they became the first few pages of Memory of Water as it is today. And I suppose the slightly weird or unusual thing about the writing process was that I actually wrote the book in 2 languages. Like I mentioned, I had just moved to England when I started writing it, and obviously I had to submit in English to my class. But I'm originally from Finland and my native tongue is Finnish. And I thought it would be quite useful to get some feedback from my Finnish writing group, because we had been meeting for several years, first in person and then online after I moved to the UK. And we've been exchanging feedback on each other's writing for quite a while, so I trusted these people and I felt that their feedback could be valuable. So I translated those first couple of chapters into Finnish as well. And then I realized that working in 2 languages actually helped me polish the writing. I don't know if any of you know anything about Finnish, but it's a very different language from English. Finnish is kind of a language with a relatively small vocabulary, but a very, very complex grammar, whereas English is kind of the opposite. In English, all the wonderful sophistication and complexity is in the words and the vocabulary, whereas the grammar is relatively simple. So working in these 2 languages felt like approaching the story from 2 different angles, or like looking at it through 2 different lenses that showed somewhat different things. And I ended up writing the whole manuscript in both languages. And I like the process well enough, despite the fact that it's very, very slow going. I liked it well enough that I'm doing the same with my second novel, which I'm finishing literally these days. And the other thing I wanted to say something about is the research and world building process. Because Memory of Water is set in a world that is quite different from ours in many ways. But the world building was entirely based on speculation of what could potentially happen based on the things that are already going on and happening in our world. So I did quite a bit of research for that, and I got to say that the research was both fascinating and terrifying at times. I took as my starting point the idea that the world of Memory of Water had to grow organically from the limitations, from the lack of fresh water, from the limited availability of that resource. So I asked myself questions like, if really the availability of drinking water was this limited, how would people survive? How would they secure the availability of water? What would they eat? What kind of crops would they be able to grow? What kind of society would they build within those circumstances? How would the situation be exploited? Who would exploit it and why? Would the government actually make the limitations of water resources a powerful tool for controlling people? So all of these questions were very central, and what made the research slightly scary at times was the fact that droughts, of course, are not a fictional concept. They are part of our world and have been for a very long time. So there were relatively few things in the end that I had to entirely make up. Most of the time, all I needed to do was look at the world around me and then really take it from there. And of course, the topic of water and climate change and extreme weather, those are topics that have become ever more timely. And you know all of this already. California is experiencing one of the worst droughts on record. The ongoing war in Syria, which has created a massive refugee crisis in Europe, something that we are in the middle of right at this very moment, that war has been linked to a huge drought, which could very well be caused by climate change. And I think it was just last week that I read about a new study that had been published, which suggested that if we continue to burn all the fossil fuels available on the planet, all the ice on the planet will eventually melt, and the sea level rise is likely to be somewhere around 50 meters or even more. Now, when I saw that in the news last week, I thought, wow, this is a scenario that I actually looked at as part of my world building for Memory of Water about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was still working on the book. And at the time, this scenario of 50-meter sea rise was considered within the limits of possibility but extremely unlikely. And now, within just a few years' time, we have gone from extremely unlikely or rather far-fetched to actually very likely or even probable to happen. Of course, it will take a while to happen. We're not going to see it within our lifetime. But our understanding of climate change seems to be changing very, very fast. And that tells us that there is still a lot about it that we just simply don't know. So yes, I think that the topic of climate change and water resources, those are things that we'll be seeing popping up in fiction for quite some time to come, because they're not going to go away in the real world. And fiction, whichever shape or form it takes, always holds a mirror to the world in some ways. But I think I've spoken long enough now, and I want to let you continue. Once again, it's such a thrill to me to know that you're all reading my book. And whether you love it or you hate it or you somewhere in between or something else entirely, I really hope that you have enjoyable, thoughtful, interesting discussions. And I wish you all the best, and I hope you all have a wonderful academic year.
And Emmy does have her own website where she posts, some thoughts and some things about her upcoming book, and there is a way to contact her. So if you are inspired to contact her, she is very accessible, even though she's on the other side of the world. So with that, then we're going to move into our faculty presentations. And so we're going to look at how the themes and topics of the book also connect to disciplines and other things that are happening here on campus. So Kim McCollum-Clark is going to get us started with that. All right, and here is your Victor, exactly. And I will move that over.
You gonna flag me if I go over?
Yep.
Okay. Hey everybody, my name is Kim. I was de-doctoring myself. I do have a PhD, but everybody calls me Kim. So if you run into me or if I come to your table later, please call me Kim. I'm in the Department of English, and so it was the thought that I should start first, since this is a book of fiction and it's the study of fiction that's part of what we do in English, not entirely. I wanted to start with the tagline of the book, knowledge is power. Is knowledge power in this book, or is power power in this book? This is one of the kinds of questions we end up asking in English. I think of stories and fiction and novels and plays and films and YouTube channels and all the kind of storytelling that we do as frames in which we can have conversations that maybe don't happen in everyday literal life. So I wanted to start with this question: why, if you want to change the world, why would you write fiction? Right? And there have been a lot of books. I could have done a whole presentation on books in the past that thought they were trying to change the world, and some that people actually say probably did. But in a world of scientific facts, why do we read stories that we both know, the teller and the listener both know are not true? So these are three kind of categories I'm going to touch on very, very quickly. There are three different layers or levels of inquiry that we do in English. The first one, why literature? So there's that. So why literature? Why does it exist at all? We actually have some theories about this now. And what we're beginning to understand is that storytelling is so deeply woven into the human brain that maybe we shouldn't call ourselves Homo sapiens. Maybe we should call ourselves Homo narrans, storytelling man. Right? So this question again, why do we tell stories that are not true? In some ways we're asking the question, what is the evolutionary advantage that's advanced by this mysterious practice of telling and listening to stories that everybody knows are not true? So we're starting to see the theorists believe that literary art is cognitive play with patterns. That what we're doing when we tell stories, both stories about our own life, but stories that are entirely made up, we are creating a frame in which we arrange information and kind of deal with it together. Okay? So why? Why do we have to do this? The evolutionary biologists, evolutionary psychologists, and now there's a new kind of hybrid form of something called affective neuroscience, are beginning to say that maybe it's the stories themselves that help our species direct and share attention on things that are important. And this is particularly meaningful because we are a social species. We have to find a way to both direct and share attention so that we can collaborate. Okay? So, for example, when we talk about Noria and the main character of our story, we share her attention to the conservation of water, and we start to feel the guilt and the tension that she has when she realizes this secret. So what's this working on in our brains? It's working on something that the psychologists are telling us are something called mirror neurons, right? So when we experience, even in a fictive story, even in our imaginations as we read, we see, for example, someone make a posture like this. And as humans, we then begin to recognize that posture and connect it to a series of intentionalities. In other words, we kind of imagine what's going on in that person's mind, even though we don't have direct access to it. And this repeated act over and over again gives us increased flexibility of thinking and actually leads to empathy. And when we have empathy, we have a common emotional geography, or a common ground for talking to each other about what we care about, what we fear, what we feel, right? And all of this happens because we're reading stories. So all of the stories of your childhood, imaginary animals, legends, myths, stories of kings, stories of ordinary people, young adult dystopias, soap operas, all of these are imaginative rehearsals for living that are happening, and they're actually creating neural pathways in your brain for empathy. So this kind of book, really fast, is a dystopian novel. Dystopias are built on something called utopia, which is from a very, very long time ago, from the 1500s. But an English major would pay attention to that word utopia, which comes from the Greek. Thomas More could have called this utopia with an E and a U, which would have meant good place. But he called it utopia with a U, which means no place. And so even in the very concept of the notion of utopia, there's a deep pessimism that humans are not going to be able to get it right. Right? So dystopias are always mirrors, are histories of the present. They have to be linked to situations and political and social events that we recognize in our own world. They don't work if they don't. Right now we're having quite a cultural moment of the dystopia, and an English professor would ask you, what do you think that means? That so much of our movies, our television, our books that we enjoy reading have such dark visions of a dystopic future. I'm going to skip that one. Okay, so this specific book, very, very quickly, we experience life with Noria, we meet her friends and her family, and so in English we would kind of focus on this book and what it has to show us in this particular book. How did this author construct it? What kinds of things did she do? What kinds of formulas or templates did she use and ignore? And I wanted to just point to this one phrase, which I think was or sentence, which was a very memorable sentence near the end of the book. The ceremony is over when there is no more water. We know in English that single observational statements like this have many levels of meaning. So obviously this sentence has meaning in terms of the plot of the novel. Noria is a tea master. When the water is gone, it's over. But it also has many other layers. So we see the breakdown in the cultural cooperation in her community when the resource of water is strained. And then we can branch it out one more time to the whole world and see the kind of things that happen when the water, which is the resource that we all need, is gone. We see chaos, we see collapse, we see control and disoriented, what was my word? Repressive, yeah, the repressive governmental systems that come when resources are at risk. So the question really that we're asking here, as we're coming to understand why we are storytelling animals, can we feel our way to better decisions? Is there a link to the emotional common ground that we experience when we meet a fictive character? I would argue, yeah. In the end, it turns out that it's the stories that we know are not true that give us the ground to stand on to investigate our own. Thanks. And that's my, I want to give credit to my book.
Thank you, Kim. And, next up, we have Dr. Stan Pierman. Let's switch this.
Yeah.
All right, now, this one does have some text at the top, so remember I warned you about that. I gave you the option to move it.
All right, so how could climate climate affect water, and I had something about energy up there, which was actually a pretty huge theme of the book, even though it wasn't part of the title. So the water cycle is basically the idea that water on Earth is present in a bunch of different reservoirs, if you will. We got water in oceans, lakes, rivers, there's groundwater, there's water in glaciers, and water's constantly cycling between these different reservoirs, right? So water evaporates from the oceans and goes up in the atmosphere, falls as precipitation on land, and then gets into a river, runs back into the ocean, et cetera, et cetera. So how could climate change affect the water cycle and cut back on availability of fresh water? Well, I'm only going to touch on a few of many, many different ways, but a couple anyway that should at least give you a little idea. So one thing is if we change the climate, we change the amount and distribution of cloud cover, we change global atmospheric circulation patterns, which changes weather. As a result, if we look 20 or 50 or 100 years out into the future, what we see is certainly there are some areas that are actually predicted to get more rain every year than they do right now, but there are also plenty of areas that are predicted to get a lot less rain than they're currently getting, so less precipitation. Obviously, that could have a big impact on freshwater availability. It's pretty well agreed that under climate change, we're actually going to see a lot more high-intensity precipitation events. What does that matter, right? It's all rain. Low-intensity rain, most of that can soak into the ground, which is important for a number of reasons, a couple of which I'll talk about a little bit later. But high-intensity events often can exceed what we call the infiltration capacity of the soil. As a result, the soil can't hold all that water. We get a lot more runoff, a lot more flooding, which isn't great, and less water soaking into the ground. Again, we'll get to why that's pretty bad in a little bit. Timing of precipitation during the year and also timing of snowmelt, which is very important for feeding a lot of streams and also groundwater systems, can also change under climate change. This is sort of a generic plot representing sort of a typical river in California, and just looking at discharge in the stream as a function of time. So current conditions shown in blue here. And California, right, very important for agricultural production for this country. So many of our fruits and vegetables and nuts are all grown there. And look at where currently the highest stream flow is. It's right during the peak agricultural irrigation season. So people who are growing these crops out there have a lot of water in the streams that they can use to irrigate. If we look at what happens under climate change, look at some projections, as we change timing of precipitation and snowmelt, we're seeing a lot more discharge coming out of the rivers earlier in the year when we don't necessarily need it so much for growing the crops. And during the peak irrigation season, when we really need that water, it's no longer in the rivers. So maybe not necessarily too good. Form of precipitation. Doesn't matter if we get precipitation falling as rain or snow. It actually does. Snowmelt turns out to be a much more efficient way to recharge and replenish groundwater systems than rainfall. So even if we get the same amount of precipitation in a location like this, but less of it falls as snow and more of it falls as rain because the temperature went up, we're going to see less replenishment of groundwater systems. The world map on here, anywhere that's not black, has at least 20%. As we get into the yellows and reds, we're getting up towards 100% of the days. Or actually not the days, this is the percentage of precipitation that falls on days where the historical temperature has been between -5 and 0 degrees C. So a little bit of warming from climate change, and we've got a lot of days that historically, 10, 20 years ago, precipitation would have been as snow, and then under climate change it falls as rain. Not as good for recharging our groundwater systems, also affects stream flow in California and lots of other places in the West. Why is groundwater important? Number one, it's important in and of itself. So in the U.S., about 40% of our fresh water supply we pump out of wells as groundwater that we use for municipal supply or irrigation or things like that. But groundwater is also vital to sustaining stream water and lakes as well. So if it hasn't rained in 2 or 3 weeks and you go down to the Susquehanna River, it's not dry, there's plenty of water. Where's all that water coming from? So it hasn't rained in 2 or 3 weeks, like I show in this picture, there's groundwater flowing into that stream channel. If we decrease the amount of groundwater that we have replenishing the system and draw down, and also if we have a higher demand for water too, so we're sucking more out, a combination of both, if we deplete the amount of groundwater here by a relatively small amount, in this illustration, less than 10% depletion in the groundwater system, we've completely dried up the groundwater inflow into the stream. Now that's conceptual. Did that actually occur in real life? No, actually it did. Republican River Basin in the central United States over the last few decades, 3% depletion in the groundwater storage. Doesn't sound like too much, led to a 50% decline in flow in the Republican River on days when it hasn't just rained. So pretty big impact there. Water and energy. So energy, again, a big theme in the book. Water, does water have anything to do with energy? In fact, they're tremendously related. In the US, 85% of our electricity is generated either by nuclear power plants or by burning coal or natural gas. All three of those methods involve boiling water. That water then has to be cooled off. Cooling is accomplished by evaporation, which we see here. So you pumped water out of a river, for instance, you fed it through the system in the power plant, and that water evaporates and it's essentially gone. So you might be surprised to know that currently, well, even more now because we're trending upwards, 2005, 41% of our freshwater withdrawals in the United States were not dedicated to drinking water or water used in your house to wash your dishes or flush your toilets or growing crops, dedicated to generating electric power. 2010, that percentage was 45. Nearly half the fresh water we withdraw from a river or a groundwater system in the US is used to generate electricity. So every time you turn on the lights or charge your phone or Google something, you are using water. You might not have thought of it, but you are. Local concerns about a week ago, Peach Bottom plant in York actually applied to pump out a lot more water out of the Susquehanna, increasing the amount by over 13 million gallons a day that they will not return back to the river. So it happens all the time. Climate change and electricity and energy, well, what happens when it gets hot? Like it's predicted to happen under climate change. We like to crank up the air conditioning because we want to stay cool. So temperature goes up, energy demand goes up, which means we're demanding more water. And if we think about global population, forecast to increase over the next decades. Huge increase in global population. More people means more water demand for drinking water, more water for growing crops. But as we think about countries, especially like China and India, that used to be primarily agricultural societies and are rapidly industrializing, for instance, China projected to build 1 coal-fired power plant a week for the next 10 years. So think of the energy demand there, the water demand, and of course it's cyclical, because the energy demand, when we're burning fossil fuels like this, generates greenhouse gases, which affect climate and deplete water. So, all interrelated, so water could be very threatened. I've just touched on a few things, lots more we could talk about, but water and energy very deeply related as well. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, our next presentation, designed to ignite your interest, is going to be co-presented, right, by Dr. Garner and Dr. Baker.
And folks, we ask that you look at this screen if possible so that you see the full piece on it.
You ready?
Go for it.
All right.
All right. What's in your wake? The wake is a wave that's created behind a boat as it moves through the water. It's a metaphor for the impact that you have on everything that you do. In order to live with a sustainable wake, one that's productive and healthy, you have to consider the impact of your decisions and how you treat people, both near and far, the planet, and whether people are able to live in a way that's economically prosperous. We all live in a web together. We are interconnected. And we would love for you to join the Center for Sustainability. We have programs designed to help you live out a prosperous, productive, and sustainable wake.
One of the programs that we have here at Millersville is a TerraCycle program. This serves as an entity that receives some of our goods that we divert away from our trash and our garbage. This TerraCycle program here is used as a verb, so we see people TerraCycling here with smiling faces, diverting some of that trash away from the stream that would otherwise end up in landfills. What TerraCycle does is they upcycle goods, which means that they take goods that were other products, Capri Suns on top, and they turn them into boxes, bags, other things that use these products in different ways. The Smile Train is what TerraCycle supports. Smile Train supports cleft palate and cleft lip surgeries around the world. People that are born with cleft palates and cleft lips suffer a lot of different social problems with this facial malady. And it's a surgery that can easily correct for some of these social problems that we might face. So we've diverted a lot of our money towards this Smile Training organization, which helps fund these cleft lip and cleft palate surgeries around the world.
The Village Garden on campus is located across the street on George Street from the bookstore in an oasis of green. We have students, faculty, staff, and even President Anderson help to plant and harvest the garden. And we would love to see all of you out there. We have a rain garden in the same space that brings a biodiversity of plants and insects and birds into this space. And a unique feature is diverting rainwater from a nearby roof directly into the garden. Across the street from Wheatland Middle School, only 3 miles away in the school district of Lancaster, we have a huge fenced-in garden where we are teaching urban children to grow their own food. And we would love for you to take part in any way possible. It's a beautiful, big space. You might decide to be a garden mentor, someone who works with children in the fields. You don't even have to know how to garden. If you have a love for children and a desire to help them prosper, we'll give you gloves and a pitchfork, and you'll be on your way. We need lots of hands on deck. Sometimes you see interesting creatures in the garden. This is my 6-year-old daughter, Ruby Sky, wearing a praying mantis, and the garden is for people young and old. One of the features of the garden is that we are donating some of the produce to people in need.
Another program that we have here at Millersville University is called Toss the Gloss. Alex Fleury, who's with us tonight, designed this poster that you're seeing in front of you now. Toss the Gloss is designed to capture glossy materials, catalogs, magazines, things like this that go to the Ronald McDonald House that give people an opportunity to stay who have seriously ill children in Hershey in particular, but across the Penn State Hershey hospital system in general. This is a picture of their work. We also have a composting program, and a composting program, how many of you have composted before? I'm not stopping for hands, thank you all. A lot of us see greens and browns connected and combined together. If we put greens and browns together in an aerobic situation, what we end up with is black gold. This is great for gardeners. It helps us fortify our soil that we need to grow some of the products and crops that we've been talking about. If we do it anaerobically and we put it underground, it becomes methane gas, which also then causes problems later on.
So our newest program that we're going to launch in January, we'd love for you all to participate in, is called the Water Bottle Challenge. Are you in? And we see people with water bottles here. The problem with water bottles is that in their transportation, production, and their disposal, they're problematic on many fronts. They're not sustainable. And so we are going to ask for volunteers to put down your bottle of water, and we will instead provide you with a Brita water bottle that has a filter in it so that you can access tap water anywhere and filter your own bottle. And we'll maybe follow you around and see what happens. So it'll be part of a psychological research project because what we are trying to help you do is to consider what's in your wake. And later tonight we're going to ask you to complete a short survey. There's the URL to see what you're interested in so we can develop a relationship with you. Folks, thank you so much for your time.
Lots of exciting things happening.
Oh, it's not for that.
All right.
It's for something else. Oh. Sorry.
Okay, next up we have Dr. Markham Dietrich. Now, Dr. Markham Dietrich's talk is actually going to start with a little video. So I'll start with that, right?
Model My Watershed meets a national need. Our goal is to have students using real data in real places to make real decisions about their local watershed. Model My Watershed is a complete curriculum. When they get on the Wiki Watershed page, they can begin with the simple model. The simple model allows them to explore the parameters that affect their watershed health. They have the ability to change land cover type, soil type, the strength of a storm, to see the runoff that occurs. Then students have the ability to go to the Model My Watershed application called Show My Watershed. They can put in an address, they can very quickly locate their watershed, see their watershed boundaries, And they can run the model. We use a TR55 to model their watershed health. And in Show My Watershed, students have the ability to compare their local watershed conditions, current conditions, to what we would call pre-Columbian conditions, before the settlement of Christopher Columbus. The second part of the application is called Modify My Watershed. Students have the ability to go in and act like land planners. They can go into an already built area and implement best management practices, like they can go in and put a green roof on a shopping mall or add porous pavement to the parking lot. And they can then model the hydrology again. This time, they're comparing current conditions to their modified conditions. Students also have the ability to go out into the environment. Using ProGware that was developed by the Concord Consortium and Carolyn Stout, students can go out into the field and collect data. They can then compare that data to the data that scientists are collecting in real time. And it gives them the power to make decisions about their neighborhood.
Nothing beats the fact that they're looking at their own watershed and saying, hey, what is the amount of runoff at the mall at Park City, or what is the amount of runoff here at the school? Can we compare the two?
The value with Model My Watershed is that middle school students want to make a difference. They want to be able to contribute to the scientific community. And so giving them this power of having an informed decision to make that impact is really valuable.
When we first did the proposal to NSF, one of the things that we mentioned is that 3% of classrooms has access to GIS technology. 3%. Now, it's going to be 100%.
The new application will be able to run on smartphones, tablets, laptops, and it will be available in June 2015.
So that video really explains better than I could in 3 minutes, because now I have 2 minutes left, an application that I worked with the Stroud Water Research Center to develop. And my goal was to give students, rather than doing school science, to give students access to real data, real models, so that they can make real decisions about the world they live in, their neighborhood. So with Model My Watershed, using what is very similar to Google Earth, you can zoom in right to your neighborhood. You can define your watershed, and you can look at your current decisions. Here's the question. Imagine what problems you could solve if you had the data to do so. This is really very similar. How many of you played SimCity as a kid? This is SimCity for smart people. This is SimCity in the real world. You have the ability to go in and act like a land planner. In the next slide, would you make better choices if you knew what impact you had? The idea here at Millersville, I can take this entire building, and with the Model My Watershed app, I can model putting on a green roof. So I can draw in a roof just like in SimCity. I can run the scientific model again and see what impact that would have. So how could we improve then our campus? What are some things we could do? In the model, there's a whole suite of conservation practices. You could model a vegetation basin, porous pavement. In Lancaster County, what if we used only no-till agriculture? Does anybody recognize what they see? Where we're standing. So I went in with the application and I drew in a green roof. I put a green roof on our new dorms. Run the model again, what impact does it have? You notice also I went in and I added porous pavement for the walkways. Rather than using impervious concrete, what if we had a permeable pavers? What impact would that have? So the goal is, again, real data with real models, so you, as a citizen, make real decisions about your impact.
Thank you, Nanette. All right, and then our last presenter for the evening, before we then launch into some table conversations, is Dr. John Wallace.
The American poet Walt Whitman once wrote, "I too
am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yelp over the rooftops of the world. In this world that we have a runaway train. What happened to my slide? There we go. We have a population that's like a runaway train. We have a need to have a voice. We have a need, we want to be heard, especially when it matters most. So the challenge that I charge you all with is to find your voice. Find your yelp to make sure that your world does not turn to dust like Noria's, to make sure your children's world is not devoid of hope, like Sandra stated. So, let's see here. Let's see if I can figure this out. So the population, no doubt, is growing exponentially, okay? This graph is fairly right on the button here with regards to where we are in 2015 and somewhere around 7 billion, okay? The question is here, where is the population growing? And we see that this rate of increase is in these areas where we already have issues with water scarcity and water withdrawal, okay? So, and we can further support that by looking at these withdrawal sources over the years and see that we see this steady incline, especially when we're looking at the U.S. population over here on the right y-axis, all right? And so, although there is a little bit of hope here because of water conservation efforts that have increased in the last 5 years or so. So, you know, I grew up in streams. I played in streams when I was a kid, and I work in streams and rivers now as a professor. And as Norman MacLean once wrote, eventually all things do merge into one and a river runs through it. But sometimes rivers don't always run free. And you're looking at the Volta River here. I do a lot of my research in West Africa, and this is in Ghana. This is eastern Ghana. The Volta River runs about 1,000 miles, and it drains about 154,000 square miles. The reason why that's such a large drainage basin is because you're really looking at the Volta Lake here, okay? And this lake has been created by the Akosombo hydroelectric hydroelectric dam project. Now, what was unknown now this was all back in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And what was not known was that this dam, all of this cement right here, created habitat for this particular insect. This is a biting fly, this is a black fly, and black flies transmit a filaria worm which causes river blindness. And we're pretty soon in a lot of villages in West Africa, we saw this was pretty common. We saw older folk being led around by younger folk in sticks, okay? And pretty soon, villages became extinct. So this has had a major sociological and environmental impact, this hydroelectric effort back in 50, 60, 70 years ago, all right? Now, in another place in Ghana where I do work, this is an area where it's being assaulted by land change and land use in a different way, through irrigation, through deforestation. And this is an area that people are intimately linked to aquatic resources for their daily functioning. And some of these issues that they have to deal with are, in terms of the assault in these aquatic systems, are new things that are coming up every day, such as these clandestine gold mines, creating these habitats, and exposing people to pathogens that they normally wouldn't be exposed to. And some of these pathogens cause diseases that are pretty horrific and are extremely impactful in these people's lives for the rest of their lives. This is Buruli ulcer. And insects are linked to the transmission of this disease. So, in a world where we have so many people, it's pretty clear that not all of us get along. And it's Norman MacLean stated some of them are not very nice, and they have difficulty listening, okay? So what I want to move to now is some rivers in Montana. This is the Bitterroot River that's about 75 miles long.
Bitterroot is a blue ribbon trout river, okay? And it's in the shadows of the Bitterroot Mountains and just not far away from Butte, Montana, where probably the country's largest or worst environmental disaster took place in the form of copper mining. And in this particular pit, this is the Berkeley Pit in Butte, it is about 1 mile long by half a mile wide, and the water here has a pH of 2.5, which is more acidic than lemon juice or Coca-Cola. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a flock of 350 snow geese on their migrational route south landed in this pit, and they never made it out because the weather front moved in, and they had to stay there a few extra days, and they never made it out of the pit. Okay, we move a little bit east, and we run into the Madison River. This is the holy land of trout fishing. This river emerges out of Yellowstone National Park. It's 149 miles long. The productivity of trout in this river is roughly 600 to 800 trout per square mile. It's amazing. But this river is under assault by with water withdrawal needs from ranchers, as well as other issues dealing with farming in this region. And the consequences are is that the temperatures are, the water volume is lowering, the water temperatures are increasing, and the trout population is disappearing. Now, we head to the Yellowstone River, about 670 miles long. An amazing river. Starts deep within Yellowstone National Park. Again, another blue ribbon trout river. Okay? But the issue here is that recently there's been oil spills, 2011, 2015, which is threatening the future of this pristine trout water. And as of late, they're looking to explore natural gas drilling in this area. All right, and these maps just show you where the oil production is in 2011 and where the natural gas production is. Now, do those mosaic colors look like anything to you guys? Can you maybe overlay something there? Well, let's do this. How about if we look at the Mississippi River drainage? All right. Look at that. Okay? Impressive. All right? But doesn't bode well for the Mississippi River. Speaking of which, this is the largest river system in our country. Drains, it's about 2,300 miles long, and it drains, it's the principal drainage basin in the continental U.S. And one of the most impactful things that's happening in this Mississippi River is the vast amount of suspended sediment and nutrient loads that get transported into the river through the various tributaries from Montana to Pennsylvania. And what we see here are these dead zones that are cropping up. These are anoxic or catastrophically low oxygen areas that's killing everything in this area. Is this book taking place in the future, or have we lived this already? Okay? Now, we don't have to go that far to see these horrific things in our riverine systems, because we can stay right here in Pennsylvania and see that our smallmouth fishery in Susquehanna River has now almost disappeared, primarily because of the assault of pharmaceutical drugs in the form of endocrine-disrupting chemicals that change and affect the reproductive outputs of these smallmouth bass, as well as accelerate cancer rates. And hey, did we walk across or drive past the Conestoga River this past weekend? Did it look like chocolate milk? Well, so we can see here that the suspended sediment in our rivers and streams is just as bad as it is in the Midwest, okay? And so what we see is that suspended sediment and nutrients are making their way down to Chesapeake Bay and creating dead zones there, okay? Now, let's bring things around to something that's more into our present day. This is a shale drill pad for shale gas. I should point out, in 2010, we had about 3,500 drill pads. And right now, we've got about 8,000, okay? Now, I'll give you some quick numbers. It takes 5 million gallons to drill a well. There are about 6 to 12 wells on a drill pad. It takes 2,500 tanker trucks to drill a well, okay? Do the math. Now, it wasn't uncommon to see things like this, and things like this are unbelievable, where you can light your faucet on fire in your kitchen sink. But this happens because of the fracking techniques that are used, which cause the migration of natural gas to eventually end up in people's wells. Now, scientists the companies that do this activity said, well, we won't listen to anyone but the scientists. Okay? Scientists put out a paper in the Proceedings of Natural Science, and it showed that the closer your house is to a drill pad, the higher concentration of methane in your well water. And guess what they said? The gas companies said, we don't believe the scientists because we think the editors of the journals stacked the deck in their favor. Okay? Now, what's happening? I've been involved in this stuff for about 6 or 7 years. And 6 or 7 years ago, nobody wanted to hear this stuff. Nobody did. All right? I got into a little bit of a tussle with the lieutenant governor-elect at that point. All right? And the reason was because it wasn't in their backyard. Well, guess what, folks? It's in our backyard now because these are the transport. These are the pipelines coming from western PA and northern PA. And guess where they're coming? Right through our own backyards. So get ready because these gas pipelines are coming through here. All right? Now, you can't see it over here. So you guys are over here. You better put on your binoculars because you can read it over here. All right? This is a quote from Norman Maclean. The river cut by the world's great floods and runs over rocks in the basement of time. On some rocks are the timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are words. And some of the words are theirs. The question I have for you guys is, what are your words? Will we be haunted by waters? So I'll leave you with the reminder that you can make a difference here at Millersville. You will and you must make a difference when you leave Millersville and you enter society to help us in this battle to save us from ourselves. That's all I got.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone. Now we have time for conversation at tables. Graduate students from Dr. Gardner's and Dr. Baker's classes are here to help facilitate conversations at the tables. Take time to review and discuss the questions that are related to the themes of the book and also that are on the tables around you in different colors. And consider what you will do to contribute to sustainability in our region. The other thing I'd like to invite you to do is, before you leave, there is a gift for each one of you. So we want to make sure that you each get one of those before you take off. So we will spend the next 15, 20 minutes or so. You will be talking at your tables, and then we'll hear back from you some of the things that you've discussed. All right? So go ahead.
So I've been meandering around, hearing some great conversations. How about we'd love to hear out from some tables just some of the things that you talked about or some of the things that captured your attention or your conversations tonight. So who would like to share? Grad students. Perfect. Oh, over here. Let's hear from this table.
What did you talk about? We talked about the Center for Sustainability and like what programs we would all want to be involved in, and for the most we all agreed we want to do like the water bottle challenge. Okay, so cool. That would be good. Great. We all thought that was good.
I'd like to do the water bottle challenge too. Is that open to professors too? Yeah. Excellent. How about from this table right here?
I think our discussion was a little more philosophical than I would have thought.
That's great.
But I think the overriding factor that we just took away from this is how do we make these presentations personal? Because we go to them, we get information, and then we leave and go our separate ways and continue living life like we usually do. So I think it's important to question some of the things that have been presented, because then that lends to deeper digging. And hopefully, I think, as one of our discussion prompts is, in that digging, we find our story, we find who we are. We find that we, as we learn in school counseling, you are the expert of your own experiences. You are the expert of your story. And how can we connect what we're learning over there to our story and make it personal. So.
That's awesome, right? Practical conversations and philosophical conversations. And what about from somebody over here on this side? Sure.
We were surprised by some of the things that we learned, like the link between water and electricity, maybe some of the threats to water in terms of like pharmaceutical drugs, just things that we were surprised. Even the pipeline coming through Lancaster, even though not everybody's from Pennsylvania, it's sort of like you don't have awareness sometimes of all these issues, so we felt that a new awareness was brought to us, but also little things that we could do to make changes, sort of like that group was saying, personal things. And in the chaos of being a new student and a freshman, sometimes that's hard. Like convenience and plastic water bottles are easy. And so how do we make our life not absorbed by that? We have to sort of just talk a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great conversation. Anybody else? Any other tables take a totally different route? With it, you would like to share? Great, thank you.
We used Dr. Ehrman's prompt as a launching pad, talking off of reducing our water use onto how we can use alternative energy sources such as solar and wind and other what has already been produced and what is being produced currently as far as different ways to produce energy, such as different businesses that use bicycle energy or different the idea of solar roadways that are being developed currently, or other forms of solar power that are being used.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Any other table groups? So as a special thank you for coming out tonight, before you leave, do make sure that you get one of the reusable water bottles. It is sort of along the same lines we think of the water skins or water skins that Noria used as well in the book. So we thank you for coming tonight, and please do fill out the What's in Your Wake survey. It will only take you a minute or so, and be sure to follow up with any of the presenters, the professors here tonight. We'd love for this conversation to keep going. We just, tonight's the launching pad, the ignite, hit the ignite button. But we encourage all of you to continue doing the great work that you're already doing. So thanks for coming out tonight.
Oh, don't forget the open space project if you're interested in applying.
It's awesome, especially at the time. That was it? Hey, nice meeting you.